listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix.
Welcome to the Decarbonisation Dialogue. I am Hannah Walker, and I believe that the best way to communicate a message is by being passionate about what you are talking about. Today I have two wonderful guests with me. I have Oliver Couch and Morgan Cartlidge from Here and Now Films. Here and Now Films was founded in 2016 by Ed Smit and Oliver with a mission to bring the calibre of work typically reserved for big budget TV advertising to a far wider audience. Here and Now are designed to be sustainable, as the company's mission is to inspire a sustainable, happy and more biodiverse planet. Their work focuses on creating human-first documentaries about urgent environmental and social issues, which aligns with the principles of making media more sustainable by raising awareness and sparking change. While this refers to the content and mission of their films, the company also likely incorporates sustainable practices in its production, following industry trends towards reducing environmental impact. As I say, today we have Oliver Couch and Morgan Cartlidge. Morgan is head of production and partner, I believe, and is all involved, with a background in journalism, is all involved in script writing, the narrative storytelling, and obviously, as I say, as director. And then Oliver is a founding company, a member of Here and Now. And Oliver is a creative director, as I say, and co-founder. He leads creative development and delivery on every single production, from early concept through to final colour grade. He ensures every film meets Here and Now's standards for storytelling, craft, and emotional impact, because, of course, emotion is so important. So welcome very much to Oliver and Morgan. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks very much for having us.
So let's start a little bit at the beginning, okay? And can you tell me a little bit about, I think you started up in Cornwall, so I'd like to know about the Cornish connection. My daughter lives in Cornwall. I'd like to know about that. I get to go as often as I can. And what brought you to film, both of you? Let's start with Oliver, and then we'll move to Morgan.
We really started by, like anyone would start, we started pre-COVID, firing pictures into the wind and trying to get in front of the companies that we really wanted to work with. But how we spearheaded that approach is we donated our time to charities. And one of our first projects was with a sustainable catch. And that kind of butterflied from there to give us the contacts to work with more and more charities around the world. The biggest problem we found was, how do we sustain working with such amazing stories? That was really where our commercial aspect of the company comes in, because that is really the spear that allows us to maintain that approach.
Mm-hmm. But what about your background, Oliver? What brought you to this point? Where does this interest begin with film?
I actually had a bit of a tangent beginning, because I actually started in the fine arts, and I went to art school, and I really struggled with the communication that art had with the real world. I thought there was a little bit of a disconnect because of how obscure it was. For me, I needed something a bit more tangible. So I actually used that degree as kind of like a foundational beginning in film. That's where it all began for me.
I see. And was that art school in Cornwall, or are we going to get to Morgan for the Cornish connection?
that was, I left Cornwall. So I grew up in Cornwall. Okay. And I thought, like anyone would, that you need to leave the home nest and fly the coop and grow. And that's why I went to Southampton to art school.
Fantastic.
And then pivoted into film, which ultimately led me back in Cornwall to set up the company, which was a really good move, because, I mean, all of the amazing stories are on our doorstep.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what an incredible environment to be in. And how about you, Morgan? Where does it all start for you?
I spent my entire life thinking that I wanted to be a journalist. From as young as I can remember, I've always loved to write, and I founded my entire degree. My A-level was everything, was all English literature. I was going to go do a journalism degree. I'd researched that you shouldn't do a journalism degree. You should do an English degree and then go journalism afterwards. And then the whole time I was doing that, I picked up photography in university, because I went down, we all met at Falmouth University in Cornwall, which is obviously a huge art scene. A lot of my friends are very creative down there. I'd always kind of enjoyed photography because my mum is quite into her photography in kind of an amateur way. I'd just always kind of been told you can't do photography as a degree. So I kind of came round to film that way, through making images through photography, and that love of story I carried through from journalism that I found combined in a really meaningful way in film. in this day and age, I just think is such a great way to connect with people. It's a medium that people are really inspired by, and you can tell really interesting stories. Most of my work is in the scripting of the film beforehand. I kind of fell into film through a love of journalism, through a love of story, and then a love of making images and photography. I spent a long time taking pictures alongside film sets, picked up more and more responsibilities in the film world until one day I kind of woke up and found, I'm a film producer now.
This is it.
It's a perfect blend of making images, which I love for photography, and that journalism and that love of
storytelling. Yeah. Telling those stories. So really, I'll go back to Oliver here. What role do you think that film, and I'll come to Morgan as well, what role do you think film and visual storytelling play in shaping the public's understanding of climate change?
I think one of the most important roles that filmmaking has is all to do with accessibility. The worst thing that could possibly happen is if the core stories and the core subject matters, but just to stay within that sphere. Mm-hmm. The environmental landscape, the environmental literature is all within the environmental voices. And I think as our role as a film company, it's to broaden where those messages are going, whether that's with brand collaborations, documentaries, character profiles. That's the main point of storytelling, really.
And what do you think, Morgan, in terms of what you have said about the stories that you tell, is what role does it have to shape in understanding that climate change? With
film, you have a really interesting opportunity to connect with people on quite an emotional level people can see themselves in, which can be really difficult when we're talking about, countries across the world and climatic events that maybe you're not involved in, or people that bear the brunt of climate change in the way that you don't, or, our viewers don't. It can be really hard for people to connect and see themselves in that narrative. And I think over the years, you look at your old WaterAid adverts and stuff like that, when people just see grief and horror, it's really easy to shut down and just think, that's not me. So, you can compartmentalize that and just not worry about it. But what we can try and do with film is tell positive stories that people want to be more invested in, because it doesn't just make you feel awful about the world, but still communicates those really important issues. And B, we can try and craft narratives that a broader range of people can see themselves in, rather than being able to just see it as, a third party other thing that doesn't relate to you. And so it doesn't really matter. So I think that's the part it has to play, is bringing those huge, massive, sometimes intangible problems, or problems happening to other people in other places, and help it connect with people all around the world.
Exactly, and making it feel that it is something that is about them and it impacts their lives, and it isn't just something else that's happening to somebody else across the other side of the world. In terms of the film industry, it is associated with high carbon output, isn't it? But you've got the transport. I don't work in film, but you've got the transport, you've got all the logistical hurdles, you've got the power needs, and stop me when I'm going wrong, but the lights, the heating, the cooling, all of that. So trailers, even with big, I'm thinking big Hollywood productions, if you like, the waste, the plastics, the water that's brought into a lot of these sets. And I think I read somewhere that I think it was an average film production with a budget of something like $70 million leaves behind a carbon footprint of 3,370 metric tons or something, which is equivalent of powering 656 homes a year. That's a big carbon footprint, isn't it? And that's the industry now, and that is the industry. Now, how do you ensure? But you have a big responsibility here, the storytelling, and we're going to talk more about the storytelling because that takes us to the heart of it. But how do you ensure your own productions are sustainable?
I think it's something that we wrestle with, and there's levels to it. Those £17 million or dollar productions leave an awful lot of carbon behind, and there's tools in the industry for productions like that. There's a platform and an organization called Albert, and what their whole mission is to try and make the film industry more sustainable, and they have toolkits and advice and training and things like that. So if you're shooting a BBC or a Netflix documentary, I believe it's compulsory that you have to go through that system. But it's not accessible to everyone. It's not so accessible to small scale. So it's not something that we can do in such an organized way, but it's definitely something that's on our mind. We can't really get away from the fact that to shoot documentaries in other places that bring these ideas to a broad, amount of people, we do have to get on planes. And there are circumstances when we choose for sustainability options to use local crews. We shot in Zambia recently where I flew out just by myself to kind of lower the carbon footprint there. We worked with a really great company in Zambia to shoot that on the ground, which has a whole host of benefits in terms of like culture and working with the people out there as well, languages and, But yeah, we try and make the choices that we can around how we transport ourselves where we hire crew versus where we travel up from Cornwall. We know we've made the choice to be here. So that's extra carbon between London and back that we don't need to be spending if we've got a good crew in London. Just being intentional about the equipment we use as well. A big of what we do is try and leverage advances in technology that make camera kit cheaper. And then I think it would be easy to just always get the next model and the next model and the next model as those comes out. But it's actually thinking, what do we actually need to create the quality point that we need right now? And then not going above that for the sake of it. There's also the simple things like we really try our absolute best to never have single-use plastics on set. We would ask our crew and ourselves to bring reusable water bowls. It's a thing in the film industry where you provide a crafty, just like snacks and bits like that for the crew. And just, again, trying to keep that to absolutely minimal plastic, no wastage there. When we have shoots where we need clothes, can we buy them secondhand? Can we donate them back again afterwards so they're not just thrown in landfill? We don't have such an organized system as Albert that allows us to track those things, but it's something that we're very conscious of and trying to make the right choices throughout.
So a lot of it is about communicating those goals, isn't it? And communicating your practices to the people you're collaborating with and the people you're using and the people also when you're traveling further afield into those other countries that you're working with and those local populations. And do you think that the film industry is doing enough?
I think definitely yes. And I think we're in a really interesting period in the film industry right now. What we believe is that there's an old agency model that's bloated. There's a director and the director's got an assistant and the director's assistant's got an assistant and all people are being fed and watered for 6 days to do a 3-day shoot. And, there was definitely a golden era where it was milked for cash. And we kind of believe that post-COVID, the tightening of the belt, just the way the economies are around the world right now, marketing spend is being reduced. And I think we're seeing that we can deliver a very similar product without a lot of that, what we would consider to be bloat. And along with that comes the fact that if you've got less people on set and you're spending less time and you're using better equipment that's more up to date, then you can find ways to bring your impact on the climate down. I definitely think that should be compulsory. And I think it is changing as more lean agencies like us come up and find that we're getting a large portion of the market. That is something that we're interested in doing. And I think increasingly and already right now, it's a selling point for us that companies want to buy into that because they know that they're getting good out of the people they're working with. Yes.
Now, Oliver, on that, Morgan mentions the leanness of your organisation. Can you just explain the structure of Here and Now? How many people you've grown quite fast? We're speaking to you today. I know we've got Ed, but you've got other people involved in this organisation. What kind of size are you and how is it structured?
So we have, at the moment, 5 of us fully working employed within Here Now, but that bloats depending on the size of the production and the production needs. Scales bloats. But I think what that all comes back to is thinking really holistically about how we make those shoots really functional, and that's functional in every aspect of the work, whether that's sustainably, and that bleeds into the financials, and that bleeds into actually providing the perfect creative for that production. And this all has no effects, which, like Morgan has said, that can actually be really beneficial for the end client, because it is this kind of old model which does have many people on the set, and the prices were inaccessible, which then does bleed into what stories can be told. And if these stories are being told by only the top of the range clients, then you're getting certain stories in the world, which is something that we want to completely avoid. We want to make sure these stories are being told and are accessible to every company out there.
And these stories that you're telling, let's talk about that for a moment. The environmental films that you do, can you tell me a little bit about which films or work that you've done or are working in or hope to work on, particularly obviously the ones that you've done, have achieved the most impact, do you think, in terms of measurable impact on environment issues?
When I think about measurable impact, I go back to the projects that have a really specific location to their impact. For example, if I go back to a Portugal project called BioEstrella, where it was literally as lean as me and Ed going out there for 2 weeks documenting the monoculture plantations within the BioEstrella valleys of Portugal and the detrimental effects that would have on the forest fires. So they would have months and months of fires where because it was all pine forestry for logging, the whole landscape would get completely wiped out. And we were documenting the whole story of that and how there's a charity out there providing systemic change. From that project, which was funded very leanly through us, they were able to directly get 2 more new employees. It might not have so much scale, but if it means a project in a local area can sustain 2 more employees and sustain another year of funding, that's exactly what we're looking for.
Yes, and raise a crucial issue, obviously, and put a crucial issue out there as well. Do you think that the leanness that Morgan talks about then is actually an advantage, particularly when you're going out, the two of you, to film, win people's trust, win people's hearts, encourage people to talk to you? Because it can be quite intimidating, can't it, if a big film crew turns up and you're doing that kind of work?
Cameras and film crews just in that Biostrella mountain is such a rural community. It's actually an aging community, so the younger generation is not staying there. They're moving out of the area. Just being 2 people allows us to get these stories, allows us to tell these stories. But it also means the stories are extremely accessible. We want to stay an extra week because there's new plans, new projects going on over the other valley that is accessible to us as well. And
Morgan, what projects have you worked on that you've felt that have been most valuable in amplifying your impact on the environment, and which projects have really taken you by the heart, I suppose?
Big one that we're still in the middle of right now is for EcoTrust. They were essentially the wing of USAID in Uganda before USAID pull out. And then they thought to themselves, we've got this infrastructure, we've got these people, we're doing great work. How can we do this about USAID? And they set up on their own 2 feet. And then they thought, well, we need to get revenue in the door somehow to fund these great projects. So they started a community-based carbon credit fund, doing carbon credits kind of in a good way, and a very traceable way, in a way that works with the local communities. Communities have agency. It's more of a hand up than a handout kind of situation. So we went out to document all the great work they do across Uganda. All 4 corners of Uganda, they have different projects going on, from wetlands to a biocredits project up in the Murchison landscape to the carbon credits all the way across, restoration of key areas that are buffer zones to national parks. And then part of that production was in collaboration with the IIED, who are also working through this biocredits project, trying to establish a framework for biocredits so they can create a new asset class, a bit like carbon credits are at the moment. But that one, that's the biggest one right now. That's amazing. And what we're trying to do with that is, carbon credits sometimes can feel a bit like a dirty word because they're always done in the best way. They often take advantage of local communities. This unreleased at the moment, but what we're trying to do with that one is show that it can be done properly. This is how you can do it properly. And then also provide a toolkit for other places to pick that up and say, okay, if I want to run a carbon credit project like this is how you do it. So it's not an exact copy and paste model, but it's a set of tips and advice and practical toolkit on this is what it can look like if you want to set it up somewhere else. It's really difficult to quantify impact because a million people could see that. We could say we've got X views on YouTube, but you don't know how many parts that's really sunk into. So that can be difficult. Really tangible things like Ollie was saying with 2 new employees for the Biostrella project, which is huge for them. That means they can carry on. It's difficult for organizations like that to get people on board. We've worked with the Somerset Local Nature Partnership, who got 3 years of funding off the back of our film. And they also linked up with huge sponsors and partners like the NHS as a result of that film. That was set up. Film screenings around the place that people came to those, they got funding and they got their NHS partnership. So yeah, it can be difficult to know exactly the impact we're having. What we can see is, these tangible things that do happen, like partnerships, like film events. And that's something we're really interested in, is how do you move films just off screen and use films to bring people together? So what we want to do with EcoTrust and what we try and do with our international docs is set up screenings and film festivals and get people in to talk about it and bring the experts in so you can get all these people in the room and kind of create that melting pot that's really productive. And then also try and do that in the countries that we've shot in as well.
Do you find that more and more people, as your work is seen a lot more, do you find that more people are approaching you? You've got a lovely website.
It's a real mixed bag. We work really hard on our marketing to be quite visible on Google. And that brings in kind of an unpredictable category of work. As a company, we, obviously believe very strongly that we only work with people whose missions we believe in. So we're never working with people that are bad. We're only working with people that we think are doing good, or at the very worst, neutral. But then also more specifically for this environmental and social impact side, that tends to be very word of mouth. So the reason we were out in Uganda in the first place is because Ollie and Ed went to Portugal with a carbon credit vendor who was doing this amazing work in that valley to try and fight monoculture and the ground drying out. He, I believe, was at a conference or someone saw the film that the boys made for that one and then got put in touch with Pauline, who's the chair of EcoTrust, and essentially said, look, this is what they've done for us. This is the impact they've had. This is how they've helped us. You want to get this message out. You need these goals and ambitions delivered. We've seen that we can do that through film. Maybe you can do that through film too. And we got put in touch with them and then went out to do that project as well. So it comes back to, it can be quite intangible to know the impact you're having. Them reaching out to other organizations to say, this really worked, they'll maybe work for you, is an indicator for us that it's working, even if it's not hard numbers. And it also drives that word of mouth marketing.
What advice would you give to emerging filmmakers who want to create sustainable, purpose-driven content?
I would say that you don't have to have a huge scientific background to tell these stories. I think there's an idea that there's these scientific narratives are out of bounds unless you have all the facts that are completely correct to the subject matter. But I think that's part of the problem in which why these stories aren't being told. I think it's access and cost and the narrative around scientific literature and scientific storytelling. And I think there's this kind of like, I mean, one of the things we've seen with EcoTrust is that it's almost an intangible subject with carbon credits is so polarizing. And that project really needed was to have boots on the ground to see what EcoTrust were doing with this wonderful social fabric across north, south, east, west Uganda, and just the people that they're connecting on the system. So I think it's don't undermine the value of the visual medium and just tell the stories.
And for the future, I think it's a little bit too early to really talk too much in detail about the legacy, because this is still quite a new venture. There's obviously a lot more that you need to do, but where would you hope that Here and Now Films goes next, and in the overall journey? What next?
One of the tricky things with film is that oftentimes the people who have the budget to pay you aren't telling the stories that you think are the most important. When we're looking at 5, 10, 20 years of the company, we're quite keenly aware of that, understanding that sadly, as climate change becomes more prominent in people's lives, as the situation gets worse, it's going to become more of a market to kind of commoditize it. But right now, we're kind of making sure that we have an engine room of the business that keeps us available and in a situation to be able to make the films we feel are the most important. And then in a position where we can, go out to Uganda to film about carbon credits and bio credits. And also when those commercial opportunities aren't there, gives us the capacity and the stable company to go and do things like Portugal, which was funded by the company, done in our spare time for free, because we really believed it was important and needed to be told. And then as we've seen earlier, that leads to more commercial ventures. So I think the 5-year plan is to have a very solid, watertight ship that is a good commercial entity that does its best to be as sustainable as possible and has a big wing of it that we're always looking to grow, that tells really important social and environmental impact stories.
Oliver, would you echo that, or do you want to add?
I would completely echo that. I think that additionally, it would be amazing to be in a position where we can consult some of the biggest marketing companies in the world and explain to them the value of environmental storytelling. Because at the end of the day, there's a certain amount of budget that has to be allocated. And if they can't see a tangible return from that, it's not going to be spent. So I think it's our responsibility to consult where proper value can be spent. A really positive result from communicating these stories.
Fantastic. Well, you've already achieved so much, and the future really does look bright. And we've got climate change, we've got climate crisis on our doorstep, as I say. It's not going away. The planet is clearly warming, and you're going to be telling the stories from across the world with great depth and emotional capacity, which is absolutely fantastic, and it's terribly exciting what you're doing. So thank you very much. Thank you to Oliver and Morgan today for joining me as a guest and providing such insight. There can be no doubt that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. Today, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow global warming. Today, we must act for tomorrow, adjusting our lifestyles to current and future impacts of climate change. Today, we must use our collective wisdom to deliver on our climate commitments. Today, we work for tomorrow's world. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channels, and please do email us at podcast@salixfinance.co.uk with your ideas for future podcast guests even. So thank you very much. And a huge thank you once again to Oliver and Morgan from Here Now Films.
Thanks again for having us. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix. For more information about our work and to find more content, please visit salixfinance.co.uk/podcasts.